Mike Rowe, I need your help.
All right, what can I do?
You've done so much great work. The show Dirty Jobs, where you go in there and take on these jobs that were essentially horrible jobs that that people think they don't want, and yet are incredibly useful to society. You sort of underline the usefulness and underline how incapable you are of doing those jobs. That's kind of the main show you've been known for, but you've been involved in everything from QVC to The Deadliest Catch to a million other shows that I didn't even know you were involved in until I researched this. But you've been a TV personality for a long time. You just wrote this great book. The way I heard it, and as soon as I started reading this, because at first I opened it and I started reading in the middle, and I'm like, "Oh, this is like those Paul Harvey books."
Yep.
And like he starts off telling a story like, you know, Jack was just swimming after crashing his boat, and you find out at the end it's John F. Kennedy or something like that.
Sure.
And so you have these great, brilliant stories of all these different people, same sort of stuff, but then you interweave your own autobiography, which I hadn't really known, all the different details. And it was really fascinating to watch as you grew and evolved in terms of your standards and your career and your successes and your ups and downs. I didn't know about how you lost your first, you know, the money you made from your first big successes and how you
Mhm.
came back from that. So, but the first thing I'm curious about is you're on QVC. That's your first big TV thing, and
1990, right?
I'll let you talk in a second. This is just like my way of doing intro. You're you're on QVC and you're hawking these just the shittiest products of all time, and it's hard. You're young, you want a career, but it's hard to weave authenticity and integrity with kind of like an opportunity like, "Oh, you could be on make money with this QVC thing." And yet you did it. You did it in this ingenious way. Maybe this is a good way to start.
Well, performance is the enemy of authenticity, or production is the enemy of authenticity. And
What do you
everybody,
mean production?
well, I mean, in my world, everybody says they want an authentic experience. But if you look at the things that we do in television to make sure that authentic experience can't be achieved, it'll break your heart. From makeup to lights to teleprompters. I mean, is there anything more inauthentic than a guy reading a teleprompter who wants you to believe he's not reading a teleprompter? And yet, this is how we get most of our news, from people who pretend to know more than they do. And if you look at all the constructs around them, they're designed to facilitate that deception. A performance is a deception, and I like deception. I like acting. I like performing. But if you're going to make your living in the world of nonfiction, more specifically in the world of reality, then you have to at least comport with some prevailing definition of what nonfiction means and what reality is. I figure in a world of nonfiction, you're not supposed to do the things that get in the way of an authentic experience. And back in those days with QVC, I hadn't given this much thought. I just realized for the first time in my life, I was on live television, uh, expected to talk extemporaneously about products that looked very much as though they'd been purloined from the midway of some condemned carnival, from those machines, with the claw that bring stuff out. And I mean, these were things that didn't sell in prime time. And suddenly at 3 in the morning, I'm being asked to pontificate ad nauseum about them. And so I did the only thing I could do when I realized I didn't know what I was doing. I looked into the camera and said, "I do not know what I'm doing." And I introduced myself to the viewers and said, "I'm new. My name's Mike. This is the health team infrared pain reliever. According to my blue card here, you can have one for 29.99. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what it does. And if you have one, call the number on the screen and ask for Marty, the producer. He'll put you through, and maybe you can tell me what the damn thing is." And that's the honest to God truth. Those were my first words out of my mouth on QVC, and the phone lines exploded.
Oh, you had didn't you do a product or 2 right before that? Like, maybe even that same first evening
Mhm.
where you were trying to
Yes.
and
That was
then
my first shift. Like,
yeah,
I tried. I tried with the Amcor negative ion generator to explain the importance of
of negative
negatively
ions.
charged yeah, I tried because,
Yeah.
I had a little bit of knowledge, and I thought, "Oh, I'm gonna share my knowledge bomb," but 20 seconds later, I had told you everything I knew about negative ions, and I still had 7 minutes and 40 seconds to go. So
Still, that I think that requires a lot of skill to come up with even a few seconds about negative ions, because people always tell me, "Oh, yeah, wind causes negative I" what are negative ions? I can't even imagine what negative ions are.
Right, and but what's going on in your brain right now is that, you're on live television. It's the middle of the night. Your audience consists of an undefined number of narcoleptic lonely hearts. Are you
Yeah.
really going to persuade them to part with 29.99 by taking a deep dive into negative ion theory? Probably not. And yet you have to kill 8 minutes. And so you play the cards you have the best you can. And those hosts, they all did their shows the same basic way. What I did was the only thing I could do because I didn't want the job, James. You understand? I mean, I auditioned for the job to settle a bet while I was singing in the Baltimore Opera. I got hired, I think, on a dare, and I took it just because I wanted to see what the experience of earning money actually felt like in my chosen field. I did not for any moment think I'd spend 3 years there free associating about an endless litany of indescribable products that I was nevertheless required to describe.
But there's so much to unpack there. First off, you were and we're gonna get to so much stuff. I'm respectful of your time. You have an hour. We're gonna get to a lot of stuff, including Dirty Jobs, which I think is really was a really important show, and everything you're working on now.
If this goes well, by the way, I got more than an hour. We'll call an audible 45 minutes in. We don't have to be to the next place till like 2:30, so let's just see how it goes.
All right, let's
You
yeah.
you strike me as an amazingly facile, open-minded, genuinely curious cat. I'll talk to you as
Oh,
long as you want.
oh well, thank you so much. So you mentioned you were singing in the Baltimore Opera,
Mhm.
and a lot of things I notice about your career is that um I don't want to call it skipping the line because it's not quite that, but everybody sort of thinks a career moves in a straight line. Like you go to college and grad school, then you get a job, you rise up, you start making a huge salary, you put in a 401k, you retire, life is good.
Right.
That is not the way you have chosen.
Correct.
But even in a meta way, you don't go the straight line. It's not like you went to opera school, fine-tuned your voice like the amazing magical instrument it could be, and then joined the opera. You took a b you kinda went through a back door, which I think is a skill people have forgotten because of the brainwashing of guidance counselors and parents and peers in high school and so on.
Yes, absolutely. My partner Mary and I discuss it in terms of Forrest Gumping our way forward. Um, I often liken it to falling down the stairs. You make progress and sometimes pretty good time, but you get knocked around a little bit, and that's okay. I personally, I realized when I was 17 that I was not going to do any of the things I thought I was going to do. I wasn't going to be the guy I thought I was going to be.
What did you initially wanna be like when you were 17?
Well, I grew up next to a magician named Carl Noble, who was my grandfather, and he wasn't a make the rabbit disappear magician. He was the kind of guy who could build a house without a blueprint magician. He went to the 7th grade, but he was brilliant. He began working early in his career, and by the time he was 30, he was a steam fitter, pipe fitter, electrician by trade, a plumber, a mechanic, welder. I just figured I would do everything he did because as a boy, all I ever saw were problems being corrected by he and my dad. They'd wake up clean, they'd come home dirty, and the world was a better place. So I wanted to do that. The handy gene, tragically, is recessive, and I didn't get the natural ability my pop got. He told me, "Get a different toolbox. You can be a tradesman, just get a different toolbox. I didn't go into the opera because I wanted to sing opera. I got into the opera because I wanted to meet girls, and I wanted to get my union card in the, what's called AGMA, the American Guild of Musical Artists, and that would let me buy my SAG card in the Screen Actors Guild so I could go about the business of becoming a sitcom star or maybe a movie star. I didn't know how any of it worked, but you're
Right,
absolutely
and just so people know, there's that catch-22 with the Screen Actors Guild,
yeah,
which is that, in order to get into SAG, you have to be a performing actor. In order to be a performing actor,
you
you
have
have
to
to
be
be
in
in SAG.
SAG. Correct. I mean, I couldn't even audition for national network spots unless I was in the Screen Actors Guild, and agent after agent told me, "Well, we don't really take on people who aren't in the Screen Actors Guild." So there were multiple barriers into my chosen field, and, the only way I could find in was a very circuitous route into the Baltimore Opera. So my plan, to the extent I had one, was to do one show. Well, first of all, learn an aria, crash an audition, get hired, do one show, and then excuse yourself and get on with your life. Well, the music was better than I thought. The girls were extraordinarily friendly. I was 22, dressed like a pirate or maybe a Viking, surrounded by young coeds dressed as French courtesans, and we're singing Verdi and we're singing Puccini and we're having a hell of a time. So I stuck around for a few years,
And so your first audition, which you describe in the book, or your first time meeting them, they saw something in your voice, but it was obviously not professional.
right?
Your Italian was awful, but you knew the words. What did they how did you because part of taking the back door is a little bit persuading people to open the door.
Correct.
So what do you think was the magic there?
I think they saw in me an absence of guile. I mean, I really wasn't trying to be terribly clever, and I think for a while they they can you say bad words on this
Yeah,
podcast?
yeah.
They thought I was fucking with them, honestly. I think there was this guy named Michael Gellert who, uh, is a barber shopper, and I knew him through this weird barbershop harmony society. He got me the audition in front of a guy named Bill Yanutzi, who spoke 5 languages and could play any aria start to finish from memory, and Tom Hall, who was the chorus master. I think those 2 thought that my friend Mike Gellert was simply joking. They brought me in completely untrained. I had a decent voice. I could carry a tune. I had memorized the shortest aria I could find from La Boheme. And Bill started playing it, and I immediately stopped him. And I said, "Mr. Unitzi, that's a bit higher than I rehearsed it. Could you take it down a key or 2? Can you play it in a different key?" I said. He said, "I can play it in any key you wish. Which key would you prefer other than that which Mr. Puccini desired?" So, you know, they just think I'm messing with them,
Mm.
but I'm not. And I sung that aria as loudly as I could, as well as I could, which wasn't very good. But at the end of it, they realized I was serious. I really wanted a shot. And I think what they heard was a certain amount of potential, and then a couple of things I couldn't control. I was young, I had a low voice, and they were in desperate need of people with both those qualities. And so the stars just lined up and they gave me a shot. But the joke was really on my friend, Michael Gellert, when Bill Yanutzi said, "He is your responsibility, Mr. Gellert. Our plan and our hope is that he shall attend a series of rehearsals and in the immediate near future suck considerably less."
Well, and you stay with them for 3 years?
7.
That's, so again, it's not that you tricked anybody into anything, it's
Nope.
not that you, avoided opera school, like, clearly you got training on the job,
Yep.
and this was legitimate, they wouldn't have kept you there for so many years without you, getting up to par, and I think that there's an important lesson that it's not about there's many ways to get to a goal, and I think your whole career sort of exemplifies that. You know,
What is attractive, right? I mean, that's a question, and anybody can ask it of anyone, but in the hiring process, it's still for sale. I don't mean in a physical way, but I mean, what qualities are attractive? Who do you want to surround yourself with? Um, in general, I think curiosity is attractive. I think enthusiasm is attractive. And I think a willingness to be in on the joke and find the laugh, or at least acknowledge the possibility that there's humor in virtually everything. I think that's attractive. And I wasn't trying to be terribly calculated about it, but looking back at it, you know, as an employer myself today, what would I respond to in a prospective employee? I would respond to me 35 years ago, 30 years ago. I didn't know my ass from a hot rock, but I wanted to learn. And I was genuinely curious about the business I was applying for. I had no references to speak of, I had no bona fides, but I also made no apology for it.
And my guess is also, if you had been completely rejected, it's not like you would have said, "Oh, that's it, I can't get my SAG card." You would have tried this was essentially an experiment,
Correct.
and you would have tried another experiment. And I think experimentation is something that's the I think repetition is often valued in our society over experimentation. And so you get the college degree and then you send out 50 resumes to an accounting firm and hopefully one of them picks you. But there's lots of experiments one can do.
It's it's worse than repetition. It's a kind of soul deadening duplicity and derivation. I mean, we mentioned network news before. Why does all local news look the same? Why does everybody sound the same when they're on the radio? Why? Why does so much FM sound the same? Why does so much music sound the same? Why do so many talk shows look the same? And why do so many reality shows follow the same format? The answer has something to do with what we reward and what we discourage. And it has something to do with the way we mitigate risk today. So if you're a producer and somebody shows up to your office like I did with a pilot for Dirty Jobs once upon a time, and you look at that show, all you really see, if you're interested in extending your career, all you see is risk because you don't see a show that looks like other shows. Now, if you greenlight a turd that resembles other turds and that turd fails, you don't get blamed for greenlighting something that looks familiar. Anybody could make that mistake. But if you greenlight a turd that no one's seen before, then you're going to lose your job. So the podcast industry is not going to be so different either. In fact, it might already be suffering from the same kind of sameness. You know what I mean? It's because
Yeah.
we don't we want to make safe bets, whether we're running a hedge fund or whether we're greenlighting a show or whatever it is. And so I think real opportunity exists on QVC, certainly, for 21 hours a day, every day, the viewer could see the same basic host doing the same basic thing in the same basic way. Now, at 3 in the morning, you got me. And I wasn't nearly as radical as people remember me. I was just surrounded by such breathtaking sameness that I could put one toe over the line and I would sound like Howard Stern in the morning.
But what's great is you created almost your own genre on QVC, which was, you have all like you said, you have all these people at 3 in the morning watching you. And what do they want? Maybe they want the products, but what they really want in 3 in the morning is human contact,
That's it.
and that's what you gave them. You said, "Call me if you know about this product." So you let them do the job for you, but you also you basically made them the hero of the story rather than the product. You invited them into the world of the extraordinary. They could call you, and now suddenly they could be on TV.
Correct. Look, that you just summed it up better than I have, and I've been trying to do this for a while, but when you put it in terms of heroism, then you're talking about protagonists. And if you're going to talk about protagonists, you're talking about narrative. If you're talking about narrative, you're talking about anagnorisis and peripeteia and all kinds of Aristotelian themes that inform our decisions in everyday life. I doubt seriously that anyone who's read Plato or Aristotle has tried to apply those themes to the business of home shopping. but they're there, and they're also there in the sewer. They're there on dirty jobs. They're there in podcasting. We're all the hero of our own story, whether we know it or not. And the way we think about ourselves, talk about ourselves, write about ourselves, present ourselves, that's all a version of the romantic vision we have of ourselves. And there are different points in our life, I reckon, when we adhere to it more or less.
Yeah, and again, we're gonna get to how this applies to other areas of your life, but I really am initially fascinated by, the QVC stuff, which I will admit is a small part of your career, but I think it starts to define who you are for the rest of it. There's there's this aspect of transparency. They're saying, I don't know." And, for instance, you've been on all the news channels, I've been a news pundit. They kinda tell you, if you say, "I don't know," we're never letting you back. Like, you're not allowed to say, "I don't know."
Right.
And and yet most people don't know most things. And and the interesting thing about the word transparency is it's not a thought, it's an action. So when you were transparent on QVC, like, "I don't know, here's the number, call me if you know about this product." It's almost like you're trading your vulnerability for, uh, for basically audience. You're giving them something, so you're getting this audience and appreciation back. They wanna know that this is the real deal.
Here's the In my view, here's the transaction. Um, we grew up in an age of authority. And in my industry, authority is the cornerstone of nonfiction. It's also the cornerstone of news. It's not just about being correct, it's about sounding correct. So, in the age of authority, you must come from a place of informed knowledge. What if something happened in the early 2000s where authority was slowly supplanted by something else? And what if that something else was authenticity? What if we went from an age of authority into an age of authenticity where I'm not saying necessarily that everything is authentic today, it's not. But at some point, I think we began to value an authentic experience as much or more than we valued an authoritative one. And what that means socially, I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know. But for me, it was positively liberating because remember, after QVC, I got my toolbox. Now I know how to get work. I'm actually fairly facile and pretty good at it. So I get booked for hundreds of jobs between 1993 and 2001. Hundreds. And I work for all the networks and I'm really good at hitting my mark and saying my line and sounding like I know more than I do. My job was to create the illusion of credibility and competence in short bursts. So I know for a fact that that's what most people do in the news. That's their job. But happily, I wandered into the Discovery Channel one day with some tape, some footage that I thought would be a new kind of show. And what that show really was, Dirty Jobs, was was a chance to let me stop being a host and start being a guest, to stop being an expert and start being an avatar. And that subtle distinction changed my own view of my own heroic self. It changed the direction of my narrative, and it allowed me to interact with people in a way that was more a reflection of authenticity than authority. The authority, in other words, went from me to my guest. And so suddenly, a septic tank inspector or a welder or a skull cleaner or a golf ball retrieval specialist is treated like Access Hollywood would treat Brad Pitt. They become the authority. I become a kind of cipher. And for me, a new sort of model emerged and it suited me.
I think because of, again, that authenticity, your audience is relating to you, and so you're looking up to the golf ball retriever, the skull cleaner, the welder, and so they become the hero, and we, the audience, realize, oh, this is kind of how the world is built and keeps on running, as opposed to, all the other sort of BS stuff that we all are told to aspire to. This is where it's happening. And, even in the branding of this show, and I think we have in part Mary Sullivan to credit for this,
Mm,
when they were trying to say, hey, Mike, let's put you up front. We're going to make you kind of the everyman hero. You were basically saying, "No, no, no, it's these guys. You have to," that's where you pulled out the pig as the branding element for this show.
sure.
And you know, I think what was so important about Dirty Jobs is that the mediocrity doesn't allow people to think these jobs even exist. Nobody asks the golf ball retriever, "What do you think of tariffs?" So, it's like everybody's talking about, "Well, what's going on? Are we killing babies in Syria anymore, or what's going on over there?" And you're basically saying, "Hey, we should. These people are important too,
Oh,
and we
sure.
shouldn't forget them."
Yeah. I mean, the pig on the pedestal, and you're right. It was Mary who said, "Listen, if you're going to do a different kind of show, why would you allow it to be promoted in such a predictable way? All the tropes, all the bromides, all the platitudes, of the blue collar apologist, the hero working guy, that there was a lot of pressure to embrace that kind of iconography. But at the time, MasterCard or maybe Capital One, I think MasterCard was doing "What's in your wallet?" They're still doing that campaign. My question was, "What's on your pedestal?" So the pig, rather than highlight a specific worker or myself, a pig who makes the ultimate sacrifice, countless times a day for our breakfasts, and various other, things. Uh, put that creature on a pedestal, and I'll stand next to it on a white cyc and extol the virtues of work and promote my show next to a pig. Visually, it's gonna make you stop. Well, not only did it work, but when that pig shat itself during the promos, and some of the most spectacular lower GI tract failures I've ever seen, certainly among porcines and all species for that matter. Um, you know, that was just delicious. To stand next to a pig crapping in a national promotional campaign while I'm trying to describe what my show is, and while the pig is actually showing you what it is from a pedestal. I mean, come on, metaphorically, that's some pretty high cotton.
Yeah, and, I think having mistakes and airing them is is real, like, that's what's interesting. Like you say, even these reality shows are so scripted now. It would be, you know, the very initial reality shows I feel were unscripted. Let's even take, like HBO's Taxi Cab Confessions in the '90s. Those were very from what I can understand, those were very unscripted, and it just felt so much more poetic as opposed to kind of the high drama and let's call it even like lipstick drama, like everything's just painted up and we get the drama that way, and like you say, there's there are reality the funniest thing is that there are reality show writers. Yeah,
Look, I mean, it's funny, like tragic funny, but
yeah,
it's true. I mean, Duck Dynasty was no less scripted than Married with Children.
mm,
The formats were almost identical, you know? Um, they were scripted in the field and they were scripted in the edit. I mean, the edit is where you really, take control of the narrative. And it's not your narrative, it's the editor's narrative or some other executive somewhere. So, yeah, I mean, with regard to reality, the purest form is a fly on the wall. That's why Taxi Cab Confessions made a certain amount of sense. Cops is maybe the greatest reality show because you're just along for the ride. So what I try and do in the shows I work on is make sure that component is present. And we don't do it as well. I used to call it a behind the scenes camera. And then, of course, you've heard the expression breaking the fourth wall, but none of that really works anymore. Today, it's about ignoring the fourth wall. You can do whatever show you want to do, but if you're working with me, you have to be all right with a documentary camera coming along and simply chronicling the entirety of the process. Now, I don't know to what degree I'm gonna use that footage, but I'm gonna use it in some way, shape, or form. I'm gonna make sure the viewer knows that we're making a show, and they're gonna get to know the camera people, and they're gonna get to know my producer. They're gonna get to know the people who are a part of the team, because that's what making TV is, especially in the world of nonfiction and reality. Now, if you're gonna make Game of Thrones, get it right. I don't want to see a guy holding up a fake dragon in the background. I'm along for the fantasy. But if you're going to call it reality, and if you're going to ask me to spend time with real people, and if you're going to tell me that you should get to know these people for whatever reason, then don't bullshit me. Show me the people. Show me the business of meeting them, and let me connect the dots for myself as a viewer.
Well, even the episode of Dirty Jobs where you have to, and you document this in the book, where you have to kind of climb up the bridge and go over the, I don't know what you call it, you have to walk 15 feet on the bar.
Mhm.
How high up were you?
680 feet.
680 feet. You didn't have the safety line.
Right.
You'd forgotten it,
Yeah.
and you were scared.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had fallen to your death, that would have been great reality TV.
Well, it would have been a heck of a moment.
So
We wouldn't have been repeating it much, but it'd be a fine way to go out, I suppose. Um, yeah, that was the Mackinac Bridge over the Straits of Mackinac, connecting the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula in Michigan. And at the end of that day, something that happened a lot on jobs was I realized I could ask people for permission to do something, and I knew they couldn't say yes. So I looked very brave on camera, asking, and typically, if it's a government agency or a municipality, they've got, lots and lots of forms that will absolutely forbid me from, in this case, walking up the cable of the Mackinac Bridge to change light bulbs. But we had a helicopter, and I knew the shot would look great. And I also knew they wouldn't let me do it. So when the cameras were rolling, I said, "Hey, you know what we should do? It'd be fun. Let me walk across the girder here off of the main road, and then go ahead up that suspension cable and change some light bulbs." And the guy in charge of the whole operation looked at me and said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do that." What a terrific way to highlight what my guys do day in and day out. And my sphincter slammed shut, not for the first time that day, but when I realized, guess what, dude? But how many times you going to learn this lesson? Don't open your big mouth. Don't ask questions you think you know the answer to unless you're 100% sure. But looking back, I'm glad I did it because it was good footage. And you know what? I went up there with a guy who does it every day, and they actually let me do it, James. They let me do something that nobody had done before with TV cameras rolling. And that turned into a really great moment for the show, and for me personally, an interesting moment.
right, because well, in terms of learning TV, risk equals, real risk equals viewership, I think.
True.
So, which again is defies sort of the way reality TV is going. But the other thing is, you knew you could take this risk and confront these fears, and it probably enhanced the show, what you were able to do later.
Most importantly, it was a real job.
Mhm.
We weren't trying to do something in order to ratchet up the stakes. Every day people walk up the cables on the Mackinac Bridge to do this exact thing. So I wasn't asking to help contrive something. I just wanted to do what that guy was doing. And so, we had total permission to do that. It wasn't exploitative, it wasn't overly dramatic. It was exactly the way the job really goes day in and day out.
And what's great about all these jobs is like, I don't know, I always used to walk around and you see bridges and you see tunnels and you see buildings. And you always sort of think, or I always would think, good thing the world is finished. Good thing they finished building all these things because I have no idea how they made a tunnel 100 years ago or a bridge or even a building now. It just strikes me as the most. I could picture how they can make a computer. I can't picture how they can make a building that just doesn't fall down immediately. And I think with Dirty Jobs, you really sort of showed everybody these things get done. They're done by real people. In fact, they're done by tens of millions of real people that are often ignored in the media. And by the way, it could pay well.
Sure, they can pay well. can you imagine we built a transcontinental railroad at a time when much of the country was inhabited with people that would, just as soon kill the workers. I mean, we built a railroad through hostile Indian territory, through the worst kinds of inclement weather. We burrowed giant tunnels through huge mountains. We went over some of those mountains. I mean, it's just miraculous. If you're not gobsmacked by that, then you haven't really read what it took to do it. We've lost our wonder today for a lot of those infrastructure things. I don't know that we could do it today, for in part because of what you were talking about before, risk. We just can't accept the risk the way we used to. And so we don't build anywhere nearly the way we used to build. And we can have a conversation about whether that's smart or dumb, but our priorities have certainly shifted. And we don't. I think because of the way we process risk as a society and the way we have elevated safety as a society into what I believe is sort of a false position, I think we've created a lot of unintended consequences that aren't good.
I mean, you look at it, I mean, there's always the theory, like, why do we have so many peanut allergies now? As in part is because everyone is kind of, using wipes on their hands every 3 seconds and stay away from anything that could have an allergic reaction at all. So we don't get immunized at an early age to these things. Now, and you mentioned how in your family there was, there was plumbing, maintenance, building, fishing, all of these things, and it was a recessive gene, and you were joking about the recessive gene, but it's really true. Like if I, my kids don't want to be plumbers. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's just I did not value that growing up, so my kids now don't value that other than they want it to work, but they don't wanna do it,
Sure.
and, I think we lose the desire to be good at being good with our hands, being able to fix things.
Look, there's something about the relationship between that which we resent and that which we depend upon, right? And the more we depend upon a thing, the more likely we are to ultimately resent it. This phone, right? I mean, I use it all of the time, and when the battery dies, it's outrageous.
Yeah,
You can put a man on the moon, but you can't make a bat, right? It's just like I'm offended to my core all of a sudden. And it's not the fact that I that I got there, it's the speed with which I got there. I live in Northern California. I was out, power went off for 4 days a week or so ago. And you really want to see what the species is, you really want a uniting moment? Watch a wealthy part of California come to the immediate realization that A, they don't have power, B, they can't get it, and C, they don't know how to fix it. They don't have a generator. They don't have the knowledge. The minute you realize the degree to which you depend on those lights coming on when you flick that switch, uh, is about the same speed you'll start blaming either PG&E or the lineman
right.
or the government or anybody but you. Right? Because the more you depend on a thing, the more likely you are to resent it. When you flush the toilet and the turd doesn't go away, by God, something must be done.
A
How could this be?
right, and at the same time, it's the most terrifying thing in the world because you don't know how to do it, and maybe you're visiting someone else's house, something like that.
Next
I've
thing you
even
know, you're shoveling your own crap out of a strange toilet and throwing it out the window to keep a little dignity.
I've
Come on,
been
you've
there.
all done it. It's happened.
It reminds Louis CK has a joke where someone has their phone, and then for a brief moment, they're out of range or their phone has some static or whatever, and everybody starts complaining. And Louis CK is like, "Really? Then instead of complaining about why don't you build Verizon? Like, why don't you build it?
Right.
Like, make put the phone towers up and all the millions of miles of lines, and you create a phone network if you don't like this one."
This is normal, right? I mean, none of us are immune to it. I'm flying from San Francisco to New York yesterday. My internet goes out. It's an outrage. I can't believe my internet goes. I just paid $12 for this and now it's out. Never mind the fact that I'm in a steel tube going,
Yeah.
1,000 miles an hour, 37,000 feet in the air, defying gravity, warping space time, doing what my great great grandfather would have taken a year to do, just to, horse and buggy across the country. We've just lost. We're an incredibly impatient people. And I think it's not because we're bad, it's because deep down we know we're disconnected from a long list of stuff that really matters. We're more connected than we've ever been in this way, right? I've got 5.5 million Facebook friends. They're drumming their fingers on the table right now, wondering what I'm doing. Why haven't I checked in 24 hours? I love them. They're actually my boss. In my world, I work for them. But they're like a barking dog in the backyard. It never stops.
So, but that's an interesting question though, because yes, the audience, you always have to, you can't completely ignore the audience. You can't be an artist and say, well, you know, screw the audience. I'm just going to do what I want to do. Now, you can do that to some extent, but it probably won't work out so well. So there's this give and take. Like on the one hand, I think you always have reverted back to authenticity and integrity to take these next steps in your career. On the other hand, you have to listen to the audience as well.
Yeah, but if you listen to them too carefully, they'll hate you,
And so
and
how do you
and then
find
they'll
that
eat you.
balance?
You know what? It's the same way you find out the stove is a little too hot. You touch it,
Mm.
and then you pull your hand back real fast, and you go, "Okay, all right, that was too hot." It's like the iron. Is it on? I mean, how do you really know? You lick your finger and you touch it, right? Um,
You iron your clothes?
well, I mean, I'm just saying metaphorically. I've
Okay.
heard of these things, these irons. I've never actually used one. No, I just ironed, believe it or not, I ironed this shirt this morning, but it didn't work out, which is why I put the sweater over it. Um, so what was I saying?
Just in terms of whether you pay attention to the audience, you
Ah,
have to.
if you work too hard to please them, they will hate you. If you completely ignore them, they will hate you. Somewhere in between that contempt and the disdain that comes from currying favor or outright apathy is the willingness to amuse yourself. So, how many people listen to this podcast?
Hundreds of thousands.
Are you thinking of them now, or are you just having a conversation with the guy?
I have to say a little bit of both. First and foremost, I'm having a conversation with you because I think because on the one hand, I enjoy that the most. It's not fun for me if I'm just interviewing. I don't view myself as a reporter. On the other hand, I like the audience. In the back of my mind, I always think to myself, "What's the audience learning?"
Here's why I think you have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. I believe they listen to your podcast because you are fundamentally concerned with amusing yourself or satisfying your own curiosity. Now, much of what amuses you will amuse them. That's the shared Venn diagrams that make the audience and the performer mesh when they mesh. Much of what you're curious about, they're curious about. But if they think you're only asking what you're asking because they wanna know, then you lose something that's really important, and I bet Louis CK would agree. The best comics, the ones I enjoy watching the most anyway, don't give a damn if I laugh or not. They're trying to amuse themselves. They want me along for the ride.
Right. So there was a comedian or there's a comedian, Brian Regan.
Hmm.
His he said in a recent talk at Google, he just tries to he views himself as the audience. So he's only trying to make himself laugh. If he's not trying to make himself laugh, then why is he even up there?
Watch his interview with Jerry Seinfeld.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
It's terrific, and I've always liked Brian because he's on Dirty Jobs, we used to talk about it in shorthand in terms of being in on the joke. And I'm not exactly sure what I mean by it other than that kind of band of brothers thing where you get a shorthand with people. Could be your audience, could be your mate, could be anybody. But it's that kind of shortcut where when you say, "Do you know what I mean?" They're already nodding their head and you believe them,
Mm.
right? It's getting to that place where you can finish each other's sentences or you can bail out of a sentence without finishing it and have that be okay. Those are the relationships we all kind of want, I think, in media.
Well, think about it, and not to keep going back to QVC, but I think again, there's a lot of seeds there that blossomed into other things. But look at your interaction, which you describe in the book with Joan Rivers.
Mhm,
So you have this really honest interaction with her. You're not, even though she's, as you mentioned, like an icon, and she's going up there, kind of hawking her jewelry line. She's very honest about it. Like this is fake,
mhm,
14 karat, whatever.
yep.
And you're very honest with her about what you're doing. And so out of all the choices she could have made when she had her own show on CBS, she chose you to be her co-host.
Not only did she choose me, she insisted QVC hire me back after firing me for the 3rd time in 3 years, by the way, personal record. So yeah, she went to bat for me, in every way you could, and she didn't really know me. We only met twice in person. We'd pass in the night. Kathy Levin was the woman she always did her shows with. I was the guy, she would do walk-ons with, or I'd walk onto her show sometimes, just very, very briefly. But we liked each other, and
Mm.
I admired her immensely, and for whatever reason, look, she's a shit disturber, and she knew she was a jagged little pill, and she knew that, she was literally selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of costume jewelry, and QVC w was desperate to have someone of her stature on their air, but Joan didn't fit the mold, and she gave me, and this is a recurring theme in my life and in the book too, but she gave me the first look at real cognitive dissonance that exists in media. When you have when you have a hit that doesn't comport with your own brand, then you have an existential dilemma on your hands, whether you're a media company or a political party, and QVC had to figure out this woman is so far outside the bounds of our G-rated box. What are we going to do? Are we going to kick her out of the box, or are we going to change our standards a little bit to allow this to work? Well, companies deal with that every day. Broadcasters deal with that every day. Discovery had to deal with that when Dirty Jobs became the hit they didn't want.
Why
Um,
didn't they want it?
because we were coming out of the age of authority, and all of the big shows on that network in those days had at their center an expert, a host you could really trust, or a credible insider, David Attenborough, Jacques Cousteau, Jane Goodall, real paragons of their field, you know, and they didn't have a guy crawling through sewers, looking under the rock, making a poop joke or coaxing the sperm out of a llama, right? I mean, I was doing things in prime time that I don't think you weren't supposed to do them. I'm not even sure they were legal in some states.
Mm.
But look, my argument to them back in the day was your single-minded proposition, the founder of Discovery, a guy named John Hendricks, brilliant man. He had one mandate: to satisfy curiosity. That took the shape of big blue chip specials and very, very authoritative series. But to me, satisfying curiosity is child's play. It's no less valid to wonder how a sewer works than how the Hubble works. And if you come at it with the same levels of curiosity, enthusiasm, and wonder and humility, well, then you ought to be able to shape a lot of different shows. And look, humility is a big part of it. And if you think of it in terms of, if curiosity is really the thing, and I believe it is, how can you be arrogant and curious at the same time? By definition, if you're a curious guy, it means you don't know. So if you're approaching everything you do from a state of good-natured ignorance, and if you're looking for enlightenment, and if you're genuinely curious, then you really can be the viewer, and you really do get permission to be wrong.
Well, and this this brings to the book. So your book again is modeled. It's like half autobiography, but half you telling stories of these other people in this Paul Harvey style. Now, to describe what the Paul Harvey style is again, It's you start off in a story where someone's having some problem, some complication, some disruption in their life, and they slowly begin to solve it. And it's like unwrapping an onion, or I don't know, unwrapping a gift. And at the when the gift is open, you finally realize is, oh, okay, this is Ted Williams, or this
Mhm.
is, some other famous person. I didn't realize that was their story. And it's almost like a puzzle to be solved. Like as soon as I'm reading one of the stories, I'm trying to figure out who is he really talking about. And I never guess. Like you have this one story where you talk about two brothers who are torn apart when the buffoon was elected,
Mhm.
and they end up not speaking to each other, blah blah blah. I won't spoil the story, but you have
It's
many.
not what you think.
Right, it's not what you think. That's always the case. It's not what you think. You
Mhm.
even lead down the path. You know where you're leading people down, but it's not what you think. But then you do what Paul Harvey didn't do, which is you show what you've learned from each story. How this particular story, the story of Ted Williams, inspires you to this other thing in your life. Like here's a guy who he says something really fascinating to you. This is a guy, the only guy in history to have batted 400 in his career, and you asked him on your last day at QVC, no less, you ask him, "What would you bet today?" And he says 270, maybe 275. By the way, I liked how he was so accurate,
Yeah.
maybe 275, like,
Maybe 275, right.
1/2 of 1% difference, like, and,
And I say, "Wait a minute, you're the greatest hitter of all." "What do you mean 275?" I was asking him how he would do against pitching today, which is very different than pitching in the '60s and '70s. And yeah, he said, "I'd probably about 275." And I said, "Ted, you're the greatest hitter of all time. What do you mean 275?" He said, "Mike, you gotta remember, I'm 77 years old."
Yeah. I love that because obviously you were saying if he was at his prime against pitching today,
Of course.
and so he did a little bit of wordplay, but then you made the really interesting observation that here he was though on QVC. Why wasn't he just playing golf with billionaires or whatever
Why is he
people
signing baseballs at midnight?
yeah.
You know, why am I talking to him in the green room? This man is a hero of the Second World War, a hero of the Korean War, a fighter pilot who has been shot at and shot people out of the sky. He he interrupts his baseball career to fight for the country, goes back to playing baseball, and becomes the greatest hitter of all time. This guy ought to be able to do whatever he wants, and here he is toward the end of his life signing baseballs and hawking. He's doing the exact same thing I'm doing. And, in relative terms anyway, that was a moment that made me go, "Wait a second. What am I doing? And what am I gonna be doing at 77?" And maybe I ought to look at my finances differently, or maybe I can learn something from Ted Williams that he isn't even trying to teach me. But the greatest part about our interaction was he went home after his shift and I went on the air during mine. And I told him, I was going to be dealing with an hour of collectible dolls, to which he said, "You got to be shitting me." And I just love that. I mean, this guy who's lived a man's life, he's connecting with this other dude in the green room at QVC, and we're commiserating as best we can. And, you know, I got to go on the air and sell porcelain dolls, and he's back in his hotel, in my mind anyway, watching me and hopefully laughing.
Because I just want to interrupt you because you start talking to the collectible dolls, like,
Well, sure.
getting advice from them about women.
Well, yeah, man. Look, it's 1 in the morning. You're surrounded by 2 dozen of these little porcelain nightmares. You don't really know that dolls are the 3rd most collectible thing in the world behind stamps and coins, but they are.
Uh,
You don't really know that the people who are watching are deeply passionate about these creatures, and so you misbehave with them. You just try and kill some time. You pick them up by their hair, you put them on your lap, you ask them questions they can't possibly answer because they're inanimate objects. And so maybe, maybe you hold a nun over your head and start singing the Flying Nun song, like I did. Or, Sister Mary Margaret was the name of the collectible nun that ultimately got me fired. But yeah, maybe you put a ruler in her pudgy little hand and smack yourself with it. You know what I mean? Maybe you grope insanely looking for the winder that is in the doll. because if you wind up this particular nun, she sings "Climb Every Mountain,"
Uh,
which you can't believe, and yet there it is right on the blue card, and maybe that winder against the laws of God and man doesn't come out of the area between her shoulder blades where a sane person would put it, but maybe it comes out of her ass, right?
Right, so this and how you act on dirty jobs and how you built this career, I would say it's very much you're being yourself.
Mm.
And what is sometimes people say to me, "Oh, just be yourself." Like, for instance, I perform we're in a stand-up comedy club. I perform downstairs 5 or 6 days a week, and when I first started out, people would say, "Be yourself." That's the worst advice possible
What if
in
you're an
many
asshole?
situations. Right, or what like, if someone told you the first time you're on an opera stage, "Just be yourself," it doesn't mean anything.
No.
Like, what are you gonna do? Sing ABC?
Bill Cosby used to say with regard to cocaine, I ask people, "Why do you do that?" And they said, "It intensifies your personality." And he says, "Well, what if you're an asshole?" You know?
Which he may have found out.
Which he might have found
Yeah.
out, right?
So what but you do seem like you revert to your strategy for when you're on the air and what's appealing to your viewers is it very much seems like you're being yourself. So what does that mean to you?
Well, Brian Regan is partially right,
Mm,
but I think he might go a little too far because
mm.
he's trying to entertain he's putting himself in the audience's place. I I can't go that far because be because they're my boss, but they're also a separate entity. It's still me in front of the camera when I'm in front of the camera, and when you're on stage here, it's still you, you can't abdicate that. You have to find that weird balance, and I think this might be a bit of a stretch, but I mean, it's a kind of empathy is what it is, and empathy is in short supply today. Empathy is not sympathy, but being able to put a bit of yourself into the audience is really important. And I think it's important too for the audience to be able to put themselves into the performer. Total sidebar, but I saw something a few years ago. I saw a play that was performed in the woods. And the play had a full orchestra that was this is it was basically an original musical, and it was put on for an audience of about 400 men
Mm.
in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. Full orchestra. It was an amazing performance. It was amazing. I mean, it could have been on Broadway. It was that good in the middle of the redwoods. And after it, they took the score and they took the play itself and they threw it in the fire, never to be done again. And they do this every year. They put on an original play and they treat it with all of the care that you would see a Broadway show, uh, and and then they burn it. And at first I thought, God, what an incredibly indulgent, weird, stupid thing to do. But then I realized what it does is it makes the audience the only people who can now remember that night. They're the witnesses. They were there. They saw it. It's their memory, and they can share it with whomever they'd like. But it was such an interesting way to sort of fuse a performance with an audience, and it was jarring to see it. And I still can't decide if it was more indulgent than interesting, but it made an impression.
I like it because it also shows that idea shows that ideas are not scarce.
Mm.
Everyone always thinks, "This is my play, this is my work of art. It's gotta be preserved in a museum or something."
Mm.
And but the reality is we're creative creatures, we should be, and when one thing goes, another one starts. And, look at all the different opportunities you've had, and you haven't put them on pedestals. You know, you've host how many shows altogether have you did you host in the '90s?
Oh, maybe 100.
Right, and so you weren't like when one got canceled, did you think to yourself my guess is no, but you could tell me if I'm wrong. You didn't think to yourself, "Oh, that was my one chance. That show was the best. That was the best thing I'm ever gonna do."
Not only did I not think that way, I would have been mortified with a hit. My m my business model was based on failure. It wasn't based on success at all. I write about Travis McGee. who's my fictitious hero. John D. MacDonald created this character back in the 60s, 21 great books, great pulp fiction. He's the central character. Among other things, he's a guy who takes his retirement in early installments. I mean, he literally says that. That's how he works. He's a recovery expert. He's the guy you go to if the cops can't help you get your fortune back. Somebody swindles you, you're screwed. You get McGee. He keeps half. So what he basically does is he comes out of retirement to help people. And then he goes back and then starts enjoying his retirement again. And and I just thought that model combined with my grandfather saying, "Get a different toolbox." I thought those 2 things smashed together, what would that mean? Well, that would mean me going to Hollywood and New York to affirmatively look for opportunities that were so poorly conceived and so hopelessly doomed that no amount of luck or talent could possibly salvage them. The trick for me was to do a good job to the point where I'd be hired again, but not attach myself to anything that looked like a winner. Therefore, I was able for 12 years to stay as busy as I wanted, to have as much free time as I wanted, and to work in a way that it was utterly on my terms. And this was terrific, you know. The only problem was with that whole model is that you can't care about anything you do. You have to do your best, but you just can't give a damn about the job
But
itself
once you started Dirty Jobs, though, that was something you cared about, and
deeply.
and that lasted, many seasons. It's still in discussions.
Yep.
You're still constantly breathing new life into the idea, into outlets for it. So, but that's where you made it work. After all these years' experience with TV and different TV shows, you had figured out a formula that worked for you.
Well, I figured out a new identity, not a formula. I figured out that I wasn't really a host.
Mm.
Spoiler alert, but basically the book gets you to a point where a baptism of a kind occurs in the sewer of San Francisco. And with a little help from an army of roaches and a rat the size of a loaf of bread, uh, I was redeemed. And, I found out that I wasn't the host I thought I was. I was a guest. I was a perpetual guest. That distinction is the only thing that happened that changed
A
everything.
and you were curious. You were curious about these jobs, and that's what created that was kind of the fuel that fired this show.
I j
Like,
I just felt like, look, at that point, I didn't wanna spend the rest of my life working on stuff I didn't care about. Dirty jobs happened because my mother called me at my cubicle in CBS in 2001 to tell me my grandfather, who you now know was heroic to me, was 90 and dying. "He's not gonna be around forever," she said. "Wouldn't it be great," her exact words, "wouldn't it be great if he could turn on the TV before he died and see you doing something that looked like work?"
huh.
The next day, I was in the sewers of San Francisco trying to shoot a segment for a show called Evening Magazine that my pop would recognize as work. It was in that sewer that I realized everything I had been doing wrong. I got that segment on the air. It led to my dismissal from CBS, but it also led to the show that became Dirty Jobs. And it wasn't, I was 42 when I went to work in earnest for the first time in my life.
And it was also, I guess, around this time, you realized that the nest egg that you had built up
Ah,
had been
yeah.
swindled away from you,
Yep.
and I can very much relate to that. How did you don't describe you describe it in the book, but you don't describe specifically what was the emotion upon finding out?
Well, it was very similar to the feeling on the Mackinac Bridge when I became acclimated to the heights, right? So it works like this. You walk up this giant suspension cable, and when you get toward the top, you run into these stanchions. So you're tied off. In fact, you're tied off on both sides because you're walking up the cable. You've got your hands on these cables around waist high. But when you come to the stanchion, you have to unhook yourself so you can get to the other side, and then you unhook the other one. And you start making time and you start making better progress and you pause along the way to change the light bulbs. Now, the problem for me was I was doing the job, but I was also aware that there's a helicopter out here with a camera, and I've got a camera on my helmet. I'm trying to film the show while I'm doing all these other things. And so I stopped thinking about what I was doing and started thinking how I was doing it, which is another big lesson we could talk about. And in the midst of all of this multitasking, I look down and I see a ship. It must have been 200 feet long, but at that height, it looked like one of the ships on Battleship. It looked like this big, you know.
Mm.
And I was like, man, I'm so high in the air. And in that same moment, I realized I wasn't tied off. Now, here's the interesting thing. Nothing changed. I didn't fall off the cable. I had no intention of slipping, but I simply wasn't tied. And when I looked at that little tiny boat and realized I wasn't as safe as I thought I was, my sphincter once again slammed shut for the second time that day. That feeling was the exact same feeling I had when I realized that the money I thought I had invested, that I thought was in a series of well diversified portfolios, didn't even exist. It had all been scooped up in this giant, awful Ponzi type scheme. Nothing changed because I don't spend money.
Mm.
These clothes I took from the last shoot. I don't own much. I never did. And at that time, I owned nothing. I lived in hotels. I had 3 different jobs. I saved all the money I made, and I lived in clothes that weren't really mine. So, it's not like all of a sudden I was suddenly in terrible debt. I don't have any kids. It's not like, "Oh, no. Oh, no." And yet, my sphincter slammed shut because my safety net was gone. And it was really interesting to lose everything financially and go from, a seven-figure portfolio to zero point zero is really no different at all than being on a kind of tightrope or a suspension cable and realizing that the net you thought you had isn't there. On the one hand, nothing changes. But of course, what you realize is the value of a safety net isn't just the fact that it can catch you if you fall, it's the fact that it can let you function when you don't. And when you suddenly remove it, most normal people, and I do think I'm still mostly normal, w- will will be transformed in an unfortunate way. The only person I've ever seen that's immune to that is that guy who just climbed Half Dome, right? Free Solo. If you haven't
Mm.
seen that, as I was writing this story, I was watching this documentary. Free Solo tells the story of a guy who climbs Half Dome with no ropes, never been done before, and it's the most jarring, shocking, incredible documentary I've ever seen because that guy's brain has no regard for safety nets. He's one of the few that can function without them.
I think it is really scary to have, society values so much that financial safety net that when it suddenly disappears, I mean, often people think, or I would often think, my self worth was the same as my net worth. And when suddenly your net worth goes to zero, when it's been, like you say, in seven figures or more, you feel you feel like people could smell it on you. And I was afraid to be desperate when I was looking for the next opportunity.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah, yeah, several times. And I had a good skill of making it and a really good skill of losing it.
Ah,
And even now people say, "Oh, well, you were so good at making it, it must give you some confidence if you ever lose it again that you'll make it again." Nope. It's the same horror every single time. And I feel like people are gonna smell it on me and then they're gonna see it on me when I try for that next opportunity. Like when you found out and you're going to keep pushing dirty jobs and other opportunities, were you afraid there was this extra layer of desperation that was gonna be on you?
no, no, I wasn't. I was just more disappointed in myself that my I really thought I had it figured out, James. I mean, I grew up in Baltimore and I have some really close friends who, we all went through the acting thing together. And I know a lot of people in the industry. And most of them to this day are struggling. They're my age and they're still in there, doing the best they can, and it's a struggle. Well, you know, I I did something different. I actually stayed in Baltimore. I got a local job in media, and I saved all my money. I just squirreled it all away. I mean, literally like a squirrel putting the nuts away. I
And you
didn't
were
need it.
living for free? We didn't
Uh,
people should read that story in the book because
yeah,
that's fascinating too.
I'm living for free in a mansion, right? I don't have any expenses. I'm saving every dime I make. And along the way, I became arrogant in a way I didn't even realize. I was congratulating. I mean, I really had it figured out. I'm taking 4 or 5 months off a year. I'm traveling around the world. I work when I want. I'm saving money. It's growing like a weed because I have this tremendous advisor. And, at the time, I just was very, very smug in what must have been a really kind of annoying way. And so I needed some kind of comeuppance. I got it. And so it was humbling to lose everything at 40 and to go to work in earnest for the first time. But look, as I was saying goodbye to Travis McGee, as I was saying goodbye to that whole business working model, my mother is calling me to tell me to do something on television that my grandfather would recognize as work. Um, all of that lined up in a really serendipitous way, and the fact that Dirty Jobs evolved out of a single segment on Evening Magazine, a show that nobody watched and I didn't even really wanna be hosting, I wouldn't have gone in the sewer, even even as a result of my mother's call, if I hadn't if I hadn't just lost everything. So a lot of things had to happen at the same time in order for me to have something like a second act.
But I think also it sounds like for you and this a similar thing happened to me, is that when you do find something that is meaningful, that you see people are responding to, that is almost the glue that keeps things together, that kind of patches you up so you could survive and then thrive. And it sounds like that's what happened to you.
Look, man, you don't know how empty your glass is until somebody fills it up.
Mm.
You know, I had never in my career ever had anybody pull me aside to thank me, you know, ever. And on dirty jobs, it still happens to this day, every single day. Now, it's funny, people watch the show for different reasons. Fundamentally, it was an entertainment proposition. Um, but I told this to Mary when I was trying to convince her to leave her law firm and actually, run a business for me. Um, I was in Newark Airport. This would have been 2006. Dirty Jobs had been on the air a year and a half. It was a hit. And I started walking through the airport, and a guy walks up to me. He's dressed in coveralls, looks like he'd been doing some maintenance at the airport. And he said, "Hey, man, I just want to tell you, my wife and I watch your show every Tuesday night. We love it. We watch it with our kids because it's a great opportunity to show them all of the different opportunities that exist and that all jobs matter." And that just made me feel terrific, reminded me of my grandfather. I thanked him. And 15 feet later, another guy walks up to me, Brooks Brothers suit, Wall Street type, says, "Hey, Mike, just want to say, love the show. I watch it with my wife every Tuesday. We watch with our kids because it's so great. We can look at this show and I can say to my kids, see what happens if you don't go to college." I'm like, "Oh, son of a bitch." It's like the exact opposite thing I'm trying to do,
I know.
but you
That's a whole
can't you can't decide how people are going to react to your smack. You have to put it out there, and they'll find something they like. They'll find something that resonates with their worldview, but you can't decide what they're gonna like.
the college thing, we could do a whole other hour-long podcast. I actually just wrote about it this morning for the 85th time, but, now we've called the audible. You've gotta get to your next
Wait a
your
minute,
next
who called the audible? What time do I have to be there? 1:30 or 2:30? It's 1:15.
Oh,
We no,
let's
what time is it? Oh, yeah. Oh,
uh,
I'm just telling you, whatever's happening next is not gonna be nearly as interesting as I mean, honestly, the guy is I don't
alright, we're
I
gonna we'll
I don't
I'll
know
I'll
about
I'll keep it
15.
I'll keep it as tight as possible. Uh college, you've been outspoken. So in 2005, I wrote for an article for the Financial Times. I said no kid should go to college anymore. And
Did you really?
yeah, and then there was outrage. I lost friendships, I lost family, everything. Now I feel it's a more of a discussion, but still, everybody will 95% will argue against me, but it's a discussion at least now. And I've seen you speaking out about college. It it really makes no sense to me why kids are going to college now. But I'll let you
Look, it's whenever I talk about this, what comes back over the net is Mike's anti-education.
which is
I'm
ridiculous.
not. I mean, of course not. If you don't have an education today, you are screwed. But an education is not purely the purview of a 4-year degree. Never has been, and hopefully it never will be. But in the late 70s, college needed a PR push, and it got one. Unfortunately, the PR push came at the expense of every other form of education. And so college became a cautionary tale. If you don't go to college, then you're going to wind up over here with some vocational consolation prize. So we set the table in a really jacked up, binary, stupid way. We put incredible pressure on a whole generation of kids to borrow whatever money was necessary in order to get their magic paper. Early on in this interview, like 5 or 6 hours ago, you said you laid out a chronology of how events typically work, but you left out one thing, the first thing. What we tell kids to do today, first and foremost, is decide what they want to be. Then, right? Then you go through the process of borrowing money, going to school, getting your degree, interviewing, blah, blah, blah. And then, if you're fortunate, all your dreams will come true because you will get your dream job and then you'll be allowed to be happy. That whole narrative is upside down and backwards. But while we're telling kids that, while we're encouraging them to borrow whatever it takes, we're ignoring a whole other list of viable opportunities. We're also taking shop class out of high schools at the same time. Is there a better way to tell a kid what's meaningful and meaningless than by just removing it from sight? So we took the arts out of the vocational arts. Votech turned into shop. We walked shop out behind the barn, shot it in the head, got rid of that. Then we watched the skills gap get wider and wider and wider and kept telling kids that those opportunities were beneath them while we put historic pressure on the same generation to borrow whatever it takes to get the magic ticket. When people ask me why college is so damn expensive today, I say, well, how can it not be? We freed up a bottomless pile of money. Now we got $1.5 trillion dollars in student loans on the books. The unemployment rate for college graduates today, I just read the article coming over, it's nearly 4%. The average rate's 3.6. Your odds are
Right.
worse with a degree. People are going to start talking about that real soon. And those guys who you lost friendships over are going to feel really stupid in the next, I would say the next couple of years, because the chickens are coming home to roost.
They have to because just everyone talks about income inequality. Why do you think it happens when you're pressuring, 50 million kids to get into more debt than a generation has ever gotten into? By the time met someone the other day, who was going into his junior year, was already $100,000 in debt. And I said, "What are you majoring in?" He said, "Business." I said, "Well, I think you need to switch majors. Business 101, don't get $100,000 in
Yeah.
debt before you
Yeah.
start having a business with profits, and
Yeah,
there's
there'll
nothing."
be no profits.
Right,
We're going straight to insolvency.
right, and you mentioned the point of this skills gap. Again, what was the country built on? It was built on innovation, it was built on all of these skills that literally built the country, and this is the biggest societal challenge, I think.
It's a it's a scandal. It's a scandal, and you know what? I I'll bitch about millennials along with anybody else. They're an easy target, but we're we're the clouds from which the snowflakes fell. We did this. We set the table. We told them the best path for the most people was the most expensive path. And then we stepped back. And when you look at things like the varsity blues scandal that's going on, and when you look at, there's just so many things about the college experience that don't have anything to do with learning. And there's so many things that are going on at college right now that are antithetical to education and and the Constitution. I mean, it's bananas. The safe space environment that has infected our way of thinking is really it's back to the safety net that we've been talking about. It's back to everybody's sphincter is gonna slam shut
A
pretty soon if we don't get this worked out.
and it's funny because, I always tell my daughters, "Don't go to college." None of them listen to me, and I figure, okay, you can't fight with a teenager really, and I wanna be there for them later, but my oldest has recently left college, so I'm very proud of her, because she realizes in the classroom, you learn classroom skills, and to do what she really wants to do, she needs to be out doing it. But right after she left, I got a note from her college. They didn't realize yet that she had left, saying she owes $16.92, or they're going to send it to an attorney or a collection agency, and they hope they don't have to do that unless she pays ASAP. They use the word ASAP.
Yeah.
And I wrote back and I said, her tuition so far, she has spent $132,000. And, uh, and by the way, if you look at the 3 schools closest to you, their employment rates after college are all higher than yours, and their tuitions are lower. So, are you real and you called me the day before for a donation. So, are you really gonna write me about, $16.92, and what does she owe it for? So, they sent me she owes it for her dorm room, or her dorm ruined a microwave, and they all share equally. And I looked up on Amazon, what's a microwave cost? A microwave costs $50. They were charging $250 for the microwave and then dividing it up among like 50 kids and charging $16. Anyway, this is part of the insanity.
Of course it is.
Mm.
It's micro macro. It's a big giant problem, but the micro examples will make you crazy. You know,
Yeah.
really more money for the student union? Really? A bigger stadium? What are we talking about? This thing that we each have in front of us right now, this miracle gives us access to 95% of all of the known information in the history of the species. The access right now that we paid for when we went to school, that was a big part of the tuition, right? You know, you wanna be in front of people who have access to the knowledge that we need. Well, we're those people now. I just watched a lecture from MIT last week for free. You can do the same thing with Yale or Brown. It's all out there. You know, the information is there. I'm not comparing. Look, my experience in college was invaluable. I finished in 1984, 2 years at a community college, a year off, and then a couple of years at a university. I got a liberal arts degree. It cost $11,000. The exact same experience today is 92 grand. In the history of our country, nothing has ever become more expensive more quickly, not real estate, not healthcare, not food, not energy, nothing. So, what's happened to higher education can't be divorced from its cost. And people try and do it all the time because they want to talk about an investment in your future. This is not an investment. This is a shell game.
Yeah, I agree. And again, we could probably there's so many aspects of that, but and there's so many other industries that are affected.
You didn't know I was going to be this fascinating, did you?
No, I knew because A, I've been a fan for a long time, but B, your book, The Way I Heard It by Mike Rowe. And again, all of those stories, you could have just kept with your autobiography, but you tell all these stories about so many fascinating people and then what you learned from them. You can see this is where education comes from. It is, like you say, about being curious about others, learning from their story, seeing what's possible, because they're not telling, they're not tell your story about Ted Williams. They don't teach that in a college class, but that story is invaluable. All of these stories and what you can derive from them, that's a real education. That's why people should read this book, not just because they're curious about you, but to see all the stories that then influenced you are so fascinating, and how you present those stories in such a almost puzzle-like manner. But Mike Rowe, the book is The Way I Heard It. Mike, thank you so much for spending the extra time and coming on the podcast. I hope you come on again,
I'll be here
and I
tomorrow.
appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, James.
Thanks.
Sincerely, I appreciate it.